Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jack Atwood podcast. I always forget the episode number because they're not as short to me as they are to you. But I think it's 13. I should know. But welcome to the Jack Atwood podcast. We have a guest today, Mark Siegwart. He is a airline pilot for a major U.S. airline. And how are you doing today, Mark?
I'm doing well. Just got here to the hotel, getting settled in, and it's a pleasure to be with you, speaking with you, and just looking forward to our discussion.
Let's get into the first question here and just brief me on what really inspired you to become a pilot and go into that specific field.
Yeah, so as a young boy, I always was interested in aviation. I think a lot of, young men want to be like a pilot or a
Mm,
police officer or a firefighter. And as a young man, a lot of people go, okay, that's cute, that's nice. A lot of, boys say the similar stuff. But as I got older and
mm,
older, it kind of stuck with me. I didn't go away. And I think what really sealed the deal was when I was about 9 years old, I believe. My grandfather actually had a little two-seater airplane, a little Cessna 150, and he was able to take me up just that one time. I never flew again until I was 18 and graduated from high school, but I flew that one time with him in that little two-seater airplane, and that kind of sealed the deal for me. I was like, okay, this is what I want to do the rest of my life. Unfortunately, he had some medical issues soon after, so he wasn't able to fly and ended up selling that
mm.
aircraft. And I was actually able to buy it from him after I graduated from high school. He held on to it, and I was able to get it. That was my first airplane that I ever owned. Was the one that I took my very, very first flight in. And one of my biggest regrets was selling that airplane. I should have never sold it, but hindsight's 100%. But that's kind of one of the things that really inspired me. I was had the opportunity to get exposed to aviation, and once I experienced it, I was like, definitely, this is what I want to do the rest of my life. At
Hmm.
that point in time, I didn't necessarily look at it as a career because I didn't know any other pilots that were in the industry or did it for a career. But I knew for sure I wanted to fly, whether that meant as just for a hobby or just for pleasure or just for sport or whatever. I just knew I wanted to be a pilot at that point.
And would you be able to walk us through your journey from going from like high school or whether it was college into flight school and how you managed all of that, went into the
Yeah,
industry?
definitely. So basically, after that first flight, like I said, I wasn't able to ever fly again after that until I graduated from high school. And my mom, actually, I believe it was either for my birthday or for Christmas. I'm pretty sure it was for Christmas. She bought me what was called an intro flight, which is basically like you go out to the airport and they kind of show you what it's all about, talk to you about the aircraft, give you a walk around of the aircraft, and then you get to go up and fly with a certified flight instructor and get to actually take control of the aircraft, like turn it, make it go up, make it go down, all of those kind
Mm,
of fun things. So it's a really neat experience. And my mom was able to buy me that first lesson or intro flight. And then from there, I just started at a local, what we'd call a mom and pop flight school. It's a very small operation, just one flight instructor. And then they had another part-time guy that was like retired, but he also did maintenance around the airport as well. And I just got my private pilot's license, which is like your first step. And then that took me probably about a
mhm,
year because I was working a full-time job. I didn't have a lot of money. I'd work all week, save up money, and then I could afford one flight lesson. And then I'd work for another week and I could afford one more flight lesson. And then I'd work another week and I could afford one more. And then later on, I was able to get a little bit better paying job and was able to, start to, take two lessons a week and three lessons a week and kind of build that a little bit closer that way. And then my after I got my private pilot's license, my instructor's like, "Hey, you really should think about getting your IFR." I'm like, "What's that?" And he's like, "Well, it's an instrument rating where you can fly in more inclement weather. You can learn to fly an airplane like in a cloud, meaning because when you're a private pilot's license without your IFR rating, you basically can fly, but you fly by visual flight rules, meaning you need to be able to see outside. There's certain limitations that you have as far as weather conditions, the cloud ceiling, visibility, those type of things. Whereas with the IFR rating, it expands your horizons a lot more, and you can actually be on a flight plan with
mhm,
ATC, and you can actually be guided in a cloud using just your instruments and talking to ATC and fly that way. So I went ahead and did that because he said it's a very smart and wise thing to do. And so I got my IFR rating. I was like, awesome. And then There was a DNR officer, Department of Natural Resource officer, that flew out of our airport, and he would do animal surveillance around the area, and he'd do fire watch around the area. And he lost his medical due to some health issues he was going through. But it was like a short time that he was going to have it. He was working on getting his medical back. So he said, "Hey," he reached out to my flight instructor and was like, "Hey, is there anybody on the field that would be able to fly with me so I can legally continue to fly and do the work that I need to do for the Department of Natural Resources, but use their certificate, meaning they're flying the airplane for real, and then I can still do my work in the aircraft." And my instructor reached out to me. He's like, "Hey, if you get your commercial certificate, this guy is willing to pay for you to go ahead and start flying, and it'd be a really great experience." So I was able to go ahead and knock out my commercial license, and that was my first job, is flying for the Department of Natural Resources just as a contract pilot until this guy got his medical back. And then once he had his medical back, I just went back to I was working my regular job and just doing that part time on the side. And then my instructor, because I got very involved in what's called the EAA, the Experimental Aircraft Association, and that basically is a program that helps mentor a lot of young people that are interested in flying, taking them up on their first flights and exposing them to aviation. So I was bringing a lot of young people out to the airport, and there wasn't a lot of young people at the airport. It was all a bunch of pretty much older gentlemen that were, retired and had extra time and money to be able to do that. And I was bringing out all these young people, and he's like, "Boy, you bring all these young people out to the airport." He goes, "You should really think about getting your flight instructor certificate." And I was like, "Well, how do I do that?" And he's like, "Well, I've never done a CFI applicant before." He's like, "You really should consider going to a different flight school for that." So actually went down to a place called American Flyers in Chicago area, and went ahead and got my CFI, my CFII, and my AGI, which are all certificates that allow you to flight instruct all the way through your private IFR commercial applicants, all the way up until CFI applicants as well. So I was able to get all those certificates down in the Chicagoland area. And at that point in time, I also started doing a little bit of volunteering for mission work. There was an earthquake back in 2010 that had happened in Haiti. And my father was a pastor, and he had a very big passion also for missions. So he's like, "Hey, we need to go help those people." So I had my pilot's license. We had an airplane. We flew down in there and started helping
Mhm.
out with that a lot, and got exposed to a lot of different kind of flying, flying internationally all the way down through the Bahamas and into Haiti, and then flying around in Haiti and the airfields down there that aren't exactly the same as what they are here. I mean, at one point we were flying into a dried up lake bed and using that as a runway to bring supplies in and out of areas there. So that was a unique experience. And then when I came back from that, I was actually able to get a flight instructor job teaching. So I was able to accumulate a lot of hours. And as I was flight instructing, several of the people would leave and go off to the airlines. And I was like, "Hey, how are you doing that? Like, what do you do to, go to an airline?" And they're like, "Boy, you should throw your app in. They would love to have you." And I'm like, "No way. I'd never even thought of doing that like as a full-time job or as a career." They're like, "Yes, they definitely would hire you if you just apply." So several of my buddies pushed me to go ahead and apply. And sure enough, um, I got a call from three different airlines. I interviewed at all three of them, got offers from all three of them, and then ended up going to what's called a regional airline. So that's basically you're flying the smaller commuter jets from smaller towns and then bringing them to the hubs to then when the mainline aircraft can then fly those from hub to hub to hub all over the world. So that's basically what I started doing. And then after that, I did that for a few years, and then I got an offer to fly Gulf Streams actually for a couple billionaires based out of Chicago area, and did that for a few years, which loved that. I loved my time at the regional airline, and then I enjoyed my time for a few years flying corporate. That was a unique experience getting to fly those jets mostly in the US, but also around the world. We did some Europe trips and got to experience my first Atlantic crossing, flying the Gulf Stream. And then after I'd done that for a few years, I was able to get a job offer at a major airline, which was my basically my dream job at that point, and that's where I currently work and really enjoy it. So that's kind of the progression up
Mhm.
through as shortened as I possibly can make it. And if you want any specific details on that, there's a
Yeah.
lot more to the story that you can plug into that. But basically, that's where I started, just at a small mom and pop shop, and then was able to continue my ratings through. Probably not the fastest, most advantageous way to get all my certificates, but I just didn't know any better at the time. So I was kind of like
Mm,
learning and going through the process and learning more and going through the process as I went, just because I really didn't have a mentor or a guide or anybody in the industry that could really help or guide me at that
yeah.
point. And back then, social media wasn't as big as what it is now. I think I might have had a Facebook that I once in a while went on. So you didn't have access. Now you have access to a lot more information, and direct contact with a lot more pilots that are out there. There's a lot
Mhm.
of aviators out there that are willing to share their experiences, share their knowledge, and help young aviators who are interested in a career in aviation, or maybe they're just doing it for a hobby or a passion as well.
So what was your first commercial flight like to you? From you did all that work for all those years, and then you finally got in the cockpit and flew a commercial plane. What was that like?
So the first time flying an airliner jet was kind of surreal, because look at, since you're a child, right? You look at these big jets flying over you and landing at these huge major airports, and you just think, wow, who are those people flying it? I mean, to me, as a young person, I never even flew on a jet until I was an adult. As a kid, I never had even
Hmm.
been on a jet. Once I was 18 years old, 18 or 19, I experienced being on a jet for the first time. So just to sit in the back of a jet, to me, was an amazing experience. So to actually be the one at the controls of an airliner jet was pretty surreal moment for me. And something that people might not know is that the first time that an airline pilot will land an airline jet in the industry is when they have passengers on board. So everything else is simulators up to that point.
Hmm.
So the simulators are very real and it's very safe. And you're with a very, what's called a check airman. So he's a very experienced instructor pilot that you're with those first few several hours, anywhere from 20 to 25 hours that you're flying the jet for the first time. But the first time you land an airliner jet, you're going to have passengers on board. So there's a little bit of pressure to perform right, because you're like,
Yeah.
holy cow, I got a lot of people like if you take your job seriously, like most airline pilots do, you think about it and go, wow, that could be my mom or dad in the back. That could be my wife. That could be my kids in the back. So you take it very serious. So, and also, you don't want to give those people a frightening experience. So you're trying to make the landing as comfortable and as safe as possible. And so, yeah, it definitely is a surreal moment, and one that you don't forget for sure.
So what does a typical day at your job look like as a pilot? For
So a
the
typical day, let's like even take for instance this morning. This morning I had the privilege of overnighting in my actual hometown. So that doesn't happen very often, but it does happen once in a while where you can bid and you can actually get an overnight in your town. So I'm based out of Atlanta. So my all my trips start and end in Atlanta. So let's say I have a 4-day trip, or what I'm on currently is a 5-day trip. I call it a fake 5-day because it ends with a red eye. So it ends super early in the morning. So it's basically like I have the rest of the day off, but technically it touches that day. So it's considered a, I get paid for that day, which is cool.
Mhm.
But basically, so I live down in Florida, but I work out of Georgia. So I actually, to every time I go to work, I leave my house, I drive to the Tampa airport, I get on a flight, and I fly as a passenger, either in the jump seat or in the back of the aircraft, up to Atlanta. And that's where I start my trips. And then from there, I will fly all over the country. It could be mostly in the US, but it could be Canada, it could be the Caribbean, it can be Mexico, that type of thing. But the aircraft I'm currently on is mostly in the United States. So I do a lot of what they call transcons. So I do a lot of Pacific coast to Atlantic coast flying. So I do a lot of back and forth across the country that way, whether it's Boston to LA, LA to JFK, JFK to Seattle, stuff like that. But then at the end of the trip, it'll end back in Atlanta. So like to right now, I'm in LA, and then to end the trip, I'll fly back to Atlanta, and I'll end early, like around 6 in the morning, and that'll be the end of my trip. So I'll fly all night through the night. That's the red eye, and then I'll land early in the morning. That'll end the trip. But not all trips are that way. They're not all set up that way. That's the thing about uh, the airline career. You can really airline job. You can really manipulate your schedule to what you want. Some people they want to fly multiple legs a day, so they'd rather have short flights, meaning really short segments where you're flying maybe an hour, 2 hour flights, but you're flying 2 or 3 or 4 legs a day, or people like me who'd rather either do 1 or 2 legs a day, but those are going to be longer legs. Those are going to be, maybe a 4 hour flight, maybe a 5 hour flight, maybe even a 6 hour flight. So you can really kind of work your schedule depending on what you want, depending on the seniority you have, and you can bid for what you really want. Some people
Yeah.
don't want like a 4 or 5 day trip. They want a 2 day trip, or they want a local trip where you literally leave and you come back that night. So it's that's basically how it breaks down as far as schedule wise. As far as the actual day, when I show up at the jet, you show up in the morning, you go through your procedures. Everything's about procedures. You get all checked in. You go through your procedures. You set up what we call we making our nest or setting up the flight deck. So you set up your iPad the way you want it. You set up your headset the way you want it. You check to make sure all the safety equipment's in place. You start firing up the airplane or getting it set up. And then as a first officer, one of your jobs is to always do the walk around. So I'll leave the aircraft, I'll go down the ramp and I'll go out on the ramp and it's visually inspect the entire aircraft, the outside of
Mm.
the aircraft, the engines, the tires, wings, the tail, all the things, make sure that everything looks right. If there's anything that looks awry or is an issue, then at that point in time, I would either call maintenance or have it inspected and checked out further. If everything looks great, thumbs up, continue on with the rest of my duties where I come up. And if it's my leg to fly, usually every other leg, we switch back and forth. So usually if you're just starting the trip, the captain will take the first leg. That means he's going to be the one manipulating the flight controls. So he's going to set up what we call the FMS, and he's going to set up the flight deck the way he wants it to fly and put in all of the data for our flight plan and so on and so forth. And then I'll double check his work and then I'll do my procedures that I do on my side. And then I'll be working the radios. The next leg, I will then take over and fly that leg of the trip. And then he'll work the radios. So he'll be the pilot monitoring. He'll be the one double checking my work and then also working the radios. And it kind of switches back and forth like that. Unless you decide, like, let's say there's an airport that you really like to fly into and you're like, hey, I want to fly this leg. Please, please. Most pilots are like, yeah, go for it. Or if you, let's say you just came off a vacation and you're like, hey, I really need the practice. I want to, sharpen up on my skills, or I really want to shoot this approach into this airport because I haven't gotten the chance to, then most pilots would be good with that. But on a regular trip, back and forth, it will go. Every other leg, you'll swap off from pilot flying to pilot monitoring. So then we'll get the aircraft all set up. We'll make sure that all the numbers look good. We'll make sure that we're all fueled up, that we have our flight plan in order, make sure all the passengers are all good, do our brief with the flight attendants, and then we will close up the flight deck door. And then we'll talk to our ramp crew. We'll do our pushback, and then we'll either be with ground or we'll be with what's called ramp control, depending on what size the airport is. Then we will taxi out, do our takeoff, and continue on our way to our destination.
So, how often do you do international flights?
Depends on how you bid. I mean, I could do international flights every month, but I would say for me, I probably do them every other month, just because I prefer a different schedule and a different type of flying than what usually those provide for me. But some guys that really, really like them, they can do them every week. So yeah, the option's there. It just depends on what you want.
So you have the option to like bid for your own schedule and where you fly. And
Right.
do they ever have to call you where you're on call and you don't really have it's kind of mandatory? Or
Yes. So basically, right now, I'm what's called a line holder. That means I bid for my schedule, and because I've been with the company for a few years, I'm able to basically get what I want. So I get the schedule that I want. I get the days off I want. I get the weekends off that I want. I get the holidays that I want just because of my seniority and where I'm based. Now, if I went to a different aircraft, that could change. Or when I was newer, that could change. Or if I decided to bid
mm,
what we call reserve line, that could change. So when you first go to the company, most of the time you're not able to hold what's called a line. align. That means that's your trip. You bid a month in advance all the time, and you'll know a month in advance what your schedule is going to be. As a reservist, you will bid for certain days off. You may or may not get them, but any of those days you're on reserve, they can you might sit at home and just get paid a whole week and not get called at all, which is awesome.
Mhm.
Or they might call you and say, "Hey, I need you to work whatever trip this is." And in that case, you don't really have a choice of like if you're going to fly to international or you're going to fly domestically or what towns or overnights you're going to get or any of that kind of stuff. All of that kind of stuff is out of your control. So you're required to fly it unless you have some sort of an emergency or medical, or you're sick or something like that. Otherwise, you're committed to fly those days because those are your days that you're on reserve.
So I usually ask people on the podcast with professions about this. Are there any misconceptions about your job as a pilot? I mean, it's a very big industry and it's a very well known title.
There's a few of them. A couple of the big ones that I get on a regular basis is one, a lot of people think that you just have a route, meaning you fly the same thing, like, oh, that's what you do. You're leaving today and you're going to fly the same route, meaning take off from the same city, land in the same another city, and you just do that every single week, which isn't the case.
Hmm.
Like every single trip, you're going to different cities, you're going to different places. You don't necessarily have a route. You have more of a schedule that you bid, like we were talking about just momentarily. The second thing is a lot of people, and I don't know if Hollywood's promoted this or this is just a misconception that a lot of people get off of movies or because of technology or because there's so much automation in the world today. A lot of people think that pilots just show up at the flight deck and we basically push a button and everything magically turns on and we push another button and the airplane takes off, and then when we decide we want to land we push another button and it just lands itself, which is not the case. Even when the aircraft is on autopilot, or even if you're doing what we're able to do in the aircraft that I fly and auto land, which not all jets have that ability to do that, but the current aircraft that I am on does. Even with that, it sounds like it's all automated, but you still have to set it up. You still have to have it all briefed up. You have to set it up. And if you set it up wrong, the aircraft will not perform correctly. And the aircraft can mess up. Automation messes up often,
Hmm.
a lot more than what most people would think, but that's fine. Nothing is there's no danger or there's no safety that was impaired. It was just the aircraft messed up, and that's why there's pilots there to take over, to correct it, to um, have control of the situation. But for it to just kind of like be magically happening on its own, I think that's kind of a misconception that is for some reason out there, because I get that question a lot of like, oh, but you guys really just sit up there and the aircraft's doing all the work or flying it, and it's like, well, are the aircraft very technology do they have a lot of technology? Are they very advanced? Yes, absolutely. I mean, we've come a long way since the Wright brothers. I will fully admit that.
Hmm.
But airplanes aren't just taking off and landing themselves to the extent of like, AI might make you think.
Hmm. So speaking of that, how far off away are we with technology and AI progressing so fast? How far away do you think we are from them controlling most of it?
I think it's going to be quite a ways off. I don't want to underestimate these things just because, I mean, the first, PCs or personal computers, people laughed and said that they wouldn't have any use. So I understand that advancement. But we've had cars now for a lot of years. We've had airplanes for many, many decades now. And if you just look at the trajectory, I think that a lot of the advancements aren't going to be necessarily the elimination of pilots, but the ability to have aircraft that are more efficient, fuel efficient, more economical, more environmentally friendly, those type of advancements. As far as the aircraft being able to do everything on its own, I think that it'll be able to be helped, and there will be a push for what's called single pilot operation, which I don't endorse or think is a smart idea. I'll say that right off the bat, but I think that's what they're going to push for. They're going to say, oh, this aircraft is advanced enough or has enough automation, not to fly itself necessarily, but that you can basically just monitor the situation and have so little input by a human that it only takes one person to do it.
So, and a lot of times after on when you're on an aircraft and the door shut and everything is all ready, there's a lot of waiting for the passengers, like from when before they get on the runway and then after and then when they start. What's all happening in the cockpit at those times?
So a lot of times after the door is closed, there's some of the busiest times for the pilots actually. So when we're actually flying, that is our time to kind of like catch up and recuperate and just monitor things more when we're at cruise. So once we're up at like 35,000, 37,000, whatever our cruising altitude is that day, it is actually a little bit more relaxed unless we're like working through weather situations, going around thunderstorms, dealing with that kind of things. But from the time that the door actually closes to the time we take off and that first several thousand feet up until we pass through 10,000 feet, that is some of the busiest time for pilots. So we're very active with that's when all the numbers are coming in for the bags that were loaded, the final fuel information is being uploaded to us. We're finalizing all of our performance data, and then we're running all of our final checklists to make sure that everything was done decent, everything was done orderly, everything was done properly, and we're double checking everything to make sure that we are set to fly, that there's no red flags, and that no safety concerns are there. And then we're finalizing any briefs and continuing on our way from there.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's actually a very busy time for pilots, and there is a lot going on in the operation during that time. That is why we have what's called a sterile flight deck policy during that time, meaning when I'm at cruise, you and I can chit chat about, hey, how's the family? You have any vacations coming up? That type of things. We're allowed to do that. But during that time, we're absolutely not allowed to. There's no chit chat about,
Mm.
the family dog. There's no chit chat about the vacation coming up. There's none of that. Even if you're buddies, like I've had the opportunity to fly with my good friends, friends that I go sailing with, skiing with, and it's awesome. But we have to remind ourselves that, hey, during this segment of the operation, it's what's called a sterile flight deck. We don't talk about anything except for what's pertaining to the flight.
Mm.
So that's what keeps it safe during those times. And that's all the way up to like 10,000. And then usually we start to go back into sterile, passing through about 18,000 in our descent coming in.
Are there any airports that you've ever flown into that are particularly hard to land in for any reasons? What
I
would
think
make a
some of
plane
the more
hard to
challenging
land?
airports that I fly into right now, I mean, I would say if we're going with the all-time most difficult flying I've ever done, it by far was flying in Haiti and the bush work and those type of things like that. Um, More challenging runway conditions and places to go. But as far as the airline's concerned, usually the more intense or the ones that you have to take a little bit more serious are ones with shorter runways, especially flying a big jet. So places like LaGuardia, places like DCA, Washington, um, places like even San Francisco, it can be a little bit more focused just because it's a big airport and you have parallel runways, and a lot of times you're landing right next to other people. So there's a little bit more briefing or precautions that you might have to take into account. And then also going to like Mexico City, just because of its high elevation, there's certain things that we brief a little bit more, just because of, and then also you have a language barrier sometimes with some of the controllers that you might not understand what they're saying the first time. So you need to make sure to clarify those type of things. So I think all of those would be like a little bit more challenging airports, not necessarily unsafe in any way, but just if you haven't been into those airports in a while, it's something that we always would talk about with
Mm.
our captain or with the first officer of, hey, I haven't been here in a while. Let's make sure we have a game plan of when we expect to be landed, when we're going to touch down. For instance, let's say you're going into LaGuardia and it's a snowstorm or heavy winds or something like that. You're going to say, hey, we're going to touch down by this point. We're going to have brakes medium. We're not going to try to make it a soft, smooth landing and float it down the runway. and make it really nice feeling for the passengers, we're going to have safety first. Safety first, and then comfort comes second. So if we have lots of runway and we have, great conditions, yeah, we'll try to grease one on for the passengers so that they can have a nice, comfortable, soft landing. But sometimes a soft, comfortable landing is not what we're looking for. We're looking for a safe landing. And in those cases, that's what we'll brief. We'll talk, hey, we want it down by this point. If we're not down by this point, we're going to go ahead and do a go around. We'll either try again or we'll divert, go to another airport that has better weather conditions or bigger runways for us to land at.
So more on the flip side, what is your personal favorite airport to fly into?
I would say one of my favorite airports is a couple of my favorite airports are actually some of the more challenging ones, just because I actually do enjoy a challenge. So I do like San Francisco in that you do have the parallel runways, and it's really neat if you're paralleling another aircraft as you're landing, and they're a heavy aircraft, meaning they're a very, very large aircraft, and they're slightly in front of you. It actually creates like a little almost like a little tornado off their wings. It actually sucks the water up from the ocean, and they're like spiraling up underneath the wing, and it's a really cool, cool view. And then if you have a little bit of moisture in the air, you can actually see like the wind coming up over their wings, and it just creates this really unique visual, especially with the like mountains there and then with the water. And I think that's really amazing. Another one I do like is the river visual into DCA as well. And that's just really neat because you're flying into the heart of the free world, and you're coming down the river visually, and you're looking over and you're seeing the Capitol building, you're seeing the Washington Monument, you're seeing the Jefferson Memorial, you're seeing all of these beautiful monuments that you've studied your whole life, and you're like, wow, it's like you can reach right out and touch them. And then you're just as you turn onto final and basically come wings level, you're about to touch down. So it's really a neat experience that way. So those are a couple of the favorites I have as far as airports that I fly to currently.
So what's the strangest thing you've ever seen from the cockpit?
So probably the stranger things that you see nowadays is a lot of the Starlinks look like kind of crazy, especially when we didn't know what they were at first. And when they first launched Starlink, it looks like lined up in a row, it almost looks like a bunch of UFOs invading. So if you're up in the air and you see them really tightly together right after launch, it almost looks like they're going to run into the jet, but they're not. Obviously, they're far, far away, but the visual on that is kind of crazy to see. And then also the other different military satellite that move around pretty rapidly and things, it can create crazy visuals. But as far as favorite visuals that I've seen up there is when you're flying up into Canada in the dark, 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 and there's the northern lights. The aurora up there is so spectacular. It's almost you literally feel like you're like flying through like some magical movie or something. You're like, this isn't even real. You dim your screens down and you look out, and the colors of the greens and the like oranges and reds and pinks all like mixed together dancing across the sky. It's kind of wild to experience that. So I think those two things are kind of, I guess, unique visuals that I've had while flying.
What is the most like bizarre experience you've ever had with like passengers? Have you ever had any like questions or anything like that?
There's some kind of crazy questions. Every once in a while, you'll get a flat earther that comes on and wants to talk to you about that kind of stuff or what have you. I usually just joke it off and let it go. But one of the strangest requests we had the other day, which I didn't really know how to handle it at first, but I had a really chill captain, so he just let it go. We had this. We landed into. I'm trying to remember where we landed into. Oh, into the Dominican Republic. So we're down in the Dominican Republic, and this dude just comes walking on, and currently a lot of the people, some of the people will ask to come up to the flight deck and say hi. And for the most part, as long as workload allows, we'll allow people to come up and say hi. So by all means, if ever you're flying on a jet with us, feel free to ask. Always ask first. Say, hey, ask the flight attendant, say, hey, do the pilots mind if I stop by and say hello? And most pilots love to have guests and visitors and invite questions, actually. So this gentleman came on board, and he's just a jovial type of fellow. And he comes on board and asks the flight attendants, hey, can I go say hi to the pilots? And he comes up there and he asks for some trading cards that basically like have pictures and some data about the airlines on them. So I pulled out the trading cards and I handed it to him.
Yeah.
And I thought, usually they just say that and then they take a couple pictures and they leave. And he goes, hey, can I put you in a headlock? And he said that, and I'm just like, "What?" And then the captain's like, "Yeah, sure." And he like puts him in a headlock, and he's like taking a selfie with the captain in a headlock in the flight deck, and I'm just watching this like, "What is happening right now?" And it come to find out, he's like some super famous comedian, and he's got like millions of
Huh.
followers on Instagram, and he like called us out and was like, "These guys were so cool and chill and everything." But it was just kind of crazy because I had no idea who this person was. He just comes
Yeah.
up in the flight deck and is like, "Hey, I want to put you guys in a headlock." It was just kind of bizarre, but it was funny. He meant it in good faith, and
Hmm.
it was a very a laughable experience. But I've never had a passenger walk up out of the dozens that have come up. I've never had one ask the to let me have them put him in a headlock or whatever. So it definitely an interesting exchange.
So he put you in the headlock or your captain?
He put the captain in the headlock. I was
Oh,
sitting there
okay.
like, "What in the world's going on?" So,
Have you ever had any like celebrities or famous people you've recognized in flight?
so most of the celebrities, I don't even know who they are. I've had several flight attendants come up and be like, "Hey, we're flying so and so," and I'm like,
Hmm.
"Okay, great. Who's that?" And then they pull up a picture online and like, "Oh, maybe I saw him in a movie." One time we flew a certain band. Um, we've flown a couple bands around. We've flown some athletes, and usually the athletes you'll recognize because it's like I mean, I fly a pretty decent sized aircraft, but their head's like way up on the roof,
Hmm.
and you're like, "Whoa, how's the weather up there?" So you're like, "Who is that person?" And usually it's either a basketball player, a football player, so on. And then also I've flown a few different actresses, a couple of them that I recognized and knew, and then also some, especially when we're going into East Coast like DCA stuff like that. You're gonna get some, I guess they would be famous or well-known politicians. So you get the
Hmm.
politicians stuff like that. But honestly, anymore your really, really famous actresses and actors are going to be flying private. They're going to be flying private
Right.
jets. That's
Yeah.
very, very popular now in the United States, and it's almost better that way because unless you're doing international, they're going to be doing that because then you don't have all the fanfare and people bothering them
Right.
and jamming up the aisles and stuff like that. So obviously, we welcome them to come on board, but I totally understand why most of them would like to just fly private.
Yeah. And like, why not? You have millions of dollars. You could
Yeah,
have
if you have
tons
the
of
money,
jets.
if you have the money, and I love my career, I love the airlines and so on. But honestly, if you have the money, there's nothing like private aviation. I've flown Gulfstreams, I've flown that on that side of the industry, and people that say, "Well, why would somebody fly private?" It's like, well, you haven't flown private yet, have you? Because once you've done it, if you can afford to, that's the way to go.
So, what would be your dream route to fly, like for a
So I
week trip?
think term, probably I would do. I mean, I don't have any specific country or route that I have in mind, but more specifically, I'm probably going to try flying what's called wide body, meaning you're flying the longer routes across the Atlantic and Pacific. I would like to try it out and then see if I like it. If it fits with my lifestyle and my schedule and I'm able to get the sleep that I need because you have to train your body to switch those time zones like that. Right now I'm only switching, a few hours. I'm not switching, massive amounts of time. So I would like to try it, and we have at our on our fleet we have what's called the 330 or the 350. So the 350 does a lot of Pacific flying right now. The 330 does domestic, and then also it does a lot of Europe flying. So I have my bid in for that. Who knows? In the next year or two, I might get it, and then I will give it a try. And if I don't like it, then what I would do is I would upgrade to captain on the aircraft that I'm currently flying, and then I would just do that probably the rest of my career. If I didn't enjoy the wide body flying, meaning flying most of all the flights would be either across the Atlantic or across the Pacific. So that would be the dream to at least try it.
So, is it ever difficult to manage the different time zones you're going into, like the major ones across?
Yeah, definitely.
See.
Especially even like when you're doing a transcon and you're resetting your clock or you're doing like red eye. Some guys refuse to do like what I'm going to do here tomorrow night, leaving at around midnight from LA and then flying through the entire night. Some pilots literally put that on their bid avoid. They will not fly that flight because they're not able to get their sleep schedule because you have to be able to
Hmm.
sleep at some point before. Otherwise, you're going to end up being awake for 24 or 30 hours. So then that's very difficult to do and not the safest thing to do. So I have the ability to work my schedule where I know to get up early in the morning, kind of do a bunch of activities, wear myself out so I can get a nap in, and then I do the flight, and then I'm able to do another short nap, and then boom, I do the rest of my day. But if you're not able to do that, and same with wide body flying, if you don't have like a system that works for you, then most of those guys end up just not doing those type of flights. So yeah, it definitely is something that it's like a kind of a science because you have to learn your own body. You can go online and look up different things and it might work or it might not work. But you have to kind of learn your own body of what works for you. And I've found that exercise and what you eat affects that greatly. So
Mm.
you kind of have to schedule that accordingly and do what's best for your body. I wish I could say like, oh, if you just do this, this, and this, that's exactly how you get over jet lag or how you prepare for red eye or how you. But it's what I do doesn't work for other people, and what other people do doesn't necessarily work. There's certain tricks of the trade you can try, but not there's not a one size fits all for scheduling
Mm.
your rest times and your um, I guess your circadian loads, stuff like that during rest cycles.
So if there's one thing you could change about the industry or the planes or anything, what would it be?
Probably the number one thing that I would change relating to my industry specifically as far as the airline part of things, and I think this stems from me being on multiple parts of the industry, meaning I've flown on the private side, done the corporate side of things, and then I've also done the airline side of things. And I really wish there was a way, and I would love to see maybe even AI could help us with this down the road. I would love to see a better way for us to screen and get people through TSA or through security lines. I feel like a lot of people get on the aircraft and they're already agitated or they're already annoyed because they've been poked and prodded and kind of treated
Mm.
like a flock of, criminals or something for just simply showing up at an airport, and um it really throws people off and gets them, very annoyed. And I don't know of anybody that's like, I love going through security. And I'm not saying we should get rid of security, but if there was a way to properly vet, for instance, on the corporate side of things, we already know who all the passengers are. They're already vetted. They're already completely screened. So there isn't a big, huge. We don't put all their bags through a screener. We don't put all their, make them take their shoes off and their belt off and their jackets off and empty their pockets and all that kind of stuff because we already know who these people are. So if there was a way that we could vet people before they ever got to the airport, and find a way that we could streamline the security process so that it was almost like painless or almost that it didn't even happen, then
Mm.
I think people would get to the aircraft much more happy, much more enjoyable. And if it's a very streamlined process, then you wouldn't have these massive delays where people are showing up 3 hours before their flight and then they're still missing it because they're stuck in a security line somewhere. And then the aircraft can't hold. So then they're ticked off at the airline, they're ticked off at the government because they're in security. They ticked off at all the other human beings. Like I've literally seen people weeping in the airport crying because they missed their flight to an important event in their life, and that's something that like they can't change all because of a crazy security
Mm.
situation that I feel like we could do better on. So if there's one thing I could change specific to the airline industry, I see that as probably one of the top things that's kind of a consistent frustration and a problem.
Yeah, I feel like with the advancements in technology, once again, I think we could definitely help and improve that with
Yeah.
artificial intelligence. One thing I wanted to touch on is, ever since the crash in, I believe it was January at the Reagan Airport in DC, there's been a lot of reports of plane crashes since then. Is it just a coincidence that all these are happening right now, or is it just because of that one flight that got a bunch of publicity and then they're just um, announcing more?
Right. So I have to be very careful talking about this type of things just because it's an ongoing investigation. And I want to respect the families that were lost during that crash and the pilots that, did their best and then obviously ended with
Hmm.
the result that nobody would want. So to specific to the media though, I think there has been a hyper focus, and I'm not saying right or wrong, on the industry, meaning there are, for instance, I saw the other day them reporting a go around. which is a normal procedure that we do. But they were reporting it as if it was a big event, like, wow, this aircraft went around and da da da, like as if it was a huge thing. And I think that there has been a huge focus on every small, tiny little thing that
Hmm.
happens within the industry. And really, it's been over a decade since any type of issue with the airline happened. And by far, statistically, it is still massively the safest form of travel. You're at greater risk when you leave your house and drive to the airport than you are once you're in the airplane flying across the skies.
Hmm.
So, for people that are just driving in their cars, I think it's more of a we're in control. We feel in control of the car, so we don't have the anxiety or the stress when related to that. Whereas when we're in the aircraft, yeah, you are putting your lives in other people's hands. But my encouragement would be that these are highly trained professionals, and there's so many checks and balances, and it's still the safest form of travel, and I believe will continue to even get better, and we'll learn stuff from issues that have happened and even become better and safer as an industry.
So you think that one incident in DC has triggered all this extra media?
It's hard to say. I think that we probably wouldn't be hearing on the national news a story about a go around had that not happened, but that's just my opinion because
Okay.
it's a normal procedure that happens all the time. So it's kind of shocking that somebody would be reporting on that. And that's not to minimize any legit reporting on any specific
Right.
things that are happening, but that would just be my thought. And I'm not even saying that they shouldn't be scrutinizing it. By all means, we invite people to check in and watch and make sure that we are doing our jobs properly. But I feel like, yes, there is a lot of maybe undue scrutiny as far as, especially on social media. I wouldn't even call it scrutinizing, but maybe over dramatizing stuff that isn't really as dramatic as what some people would have you believe. In other words, they're trying to bring fear into people in situations that it's just not necessary.
What advice would you give to someone who wants to become a pilot?
So I'd say if somebody's interested in becoming a pilot, number one, go get an intro flight. So that's an opportunity to really ask a certified flight instructor all the questions about that you have about aviation and the process and what it would entail. And it's just a fun experience. You get to take the controls of an aircraft for the first time, which is awesome. After you do the intro flight, if you might say, "Wow, I thought I wanted to be a pilot, but yikes, I have zero interest in doing all of that." Anyway, it was a fun ride and probably cheaper than going to Disney. So no harm, no foul. But if you're like me, and probably like a lot of people, you're going to say, "Yes, I absolutely want to do this." So then, secondly, I would say go get your medical. So you have to go get an aviation medical because it would be bad if you spent thousands and thousands of dollars on training and then found out later on that you weren't able to get the medical. So I would always say go ahead and get a medical. So get the intro. As soon as you know for sure this is what I want to do, get that medical out of the way just so you know you can get it. And then thirdly, I would say get a mentor because if you have a mentor, somebody who's in the industry or is a pilot already, they're going to be able to help you along through the process and answer so many questions and be there for you when you get discouraged and you feel like wanting to quit. And they're going to be able to give you advice that maybe an instructor wouldn't give you, or you're not comfortable with asking the instructor that because you don't want to look stupid or you don't want to, offend them or whatever the dynamic. It's a different dynamic. But if you have a mentor, they're there to help you all the way through the process. So those three things would be my top things for somebody interested in wanting to either have a career or just get their pilot's license.
So my grandfather, who's actually on the podcast a few episodes ago, he owned uh, a hobby plane on his property. He had multiple acres there, and he had his own
Yes,
hangar, and
that's
he
so
flew it a
awesome.
lot.
Yeah, that would actually be a dream of mine down the road, if the Lord would allow, is to actually either live on or live near a little airstrip and have what we call a GA or a general aviation aircraft, just a little 4 or 6 seater aircraft just to fly low and slow and have fun. In fact, the next aircraft that I would love to have and own personally would be a Lake Buccaneer, which is like an amphibious aircraft. You can land it on the water and you can
Mm.
land it on the land. And it's not going places the airplane by any means. It's not to travel across the country or anything like that. It's just you fly it low and slow, and it's back to the roots of aviation where you got
Yeah.
to fly it the entire time. No automation, no autopilot, none of that kind of stuff. And it's just a really enjoyable experience. And I love the water. I love boating. I love flying. And it's kind of combination of those two things. So yeah, that's really awesome.
Well, Mark, it was great having you on the podcast. I appreciate you taking the time, and I'm glad we could work this all out. Would you have any final thoughts or stories you'd like to share with our listeners before we go?
I would say, as far as the final thoughts, if you definitely want to do it, then you kind of have to have a certain passion for it. So I'll say that it's not an easy journey. It's not impossible though. So if you're like, "Oh, I don't have the money," or "I'm not smart enough," those aren't good enough reasons not to become a pilot or go into aviation. Because I know a lot of people that are, a lot richer than me and a lot smarter than me, and they didn't make it, not because they weren't smart enough or they didn't have enough money, but because they just didn't have that passion, they didn't have that follow through, they didn't have that grit. So if you're going to go for it, I say go do your research, and then once you decide to do it, don't quit. Just make up your mind, I'm not quitting, I'm going to finish this thing. And then secondly, as far as a story, I would say that we all have to be cognizant of what's happening around us. Meaning, one time I was on a flight and I was doing what's called a deadhead. So uh, I was sitting in the back, but I was in uniform and I was flying to then go operate a different flight. And there was this gentleman that was across from me, and he was becoming very annoyed and very irate. We had some icing conditions, so we had to go to an icing to get de-ice the aircraft, and it was taking a long time, and there was a lot of delays at the airport, and it had been going on for a long time. All of us wanted to take off, but it's just we were in line, and that's how long everything was taking. So he became kind of frustrated and angry with the flight attendant. He started kind of like getting on her to the extent that she kind of looked over at me just because I was in uniform, because she was flustered and didn't know what to say to this guy, and he was kind of being annoying to her. Like, can you say something to help this guy? So I just started talking to the gentleman, and come to find out, he had just lost his daughter. He was actually coming back from the funeral from that. His wife had medical conditions. She wasn't even able to go on down to her own daughter's funeral. He was trying to get back to up there to help her get to some doctor's appointments. And after I learned all of this story, then I was able to talk to him and help him and kind of calm him down. So you realize that sometimes when you meet that annoying person at the airport, next time you go flying, and maybe they're saying something not nice to you, or they bump into you, or they're rude to you, or nasty to you, our initial instinct is to be like, "You're wronging me," or "You're in the wrong, you're a bad person." And come to find out that even though maybe he said some things he shouldn't have said, he was a hurting person that just needed somebody to empathize with him and to listen to him. And I think that if we take that mindset into uh, our goals and our ambitions and into our life, whenever you come across situations, always look at how can I help that person, or how can I assist? How can I listen? And those are kind of some of my final thoughts as far as, yes, this industry is amazing. It gives you awesome opportunities, but I think it's about people at the end of the day. We get people to destinations, we get them to those funerals, we get them to those weddings, we get them to the experiences, and we get so wrapped up into my schedule, or how much money am I making on this trip, or my destination that I'm going to, that we forget that there are a lot of people that we carry around in this industry who put their lives in our hands, and our decisions affect them. But also to take that extra moment sometimes, when given the opportunity, to listen to somebody who maybe is causing trouble or seemingly in the wrong or needs to be put in their place, and just listen to them. And sometimes you'll get to meet and experience a really unique and wonderful person. And I think that that's something that all of us could try to be better at.
I agree. That's a great thought. Well, I loved having you on the podcast, Mark. Hope we can do it again sometime. But this concludes episode 13 of the Jack Atwood podcast. We'll see you on the flip side.